Life rarely announces when it's about to test you. Sometimes it doesn't whisper or warn, it just opens a door, and standing there is the past you thought you'd buried. That afternoon, as the rain painted slow rivers down the windows of a quiet corner cafe in Seattle, Claire Alden sat alone with a cappuccino turning cold between her palms. The air carried a quiet chill, unseasonal for early May, but inside Mara's table, it was warm, humming with soft conversations and the scent of cinnamon pastries. Claire blended in navy blouse, worn jeans, hair pulled back casually. But inside, something churned. Not long ago, peace like this would have felt impossible. The memory still haunted her of that final day with Liam Prescott. Divorce papers, raised voices, silence that screamed. They had once believed their love could weather anything. College sweethearts with notebooks full of dreams. But dreams don't stand a chance against someone who starts to see you as competition. Liam's ambition had slowly turned cruel, slicing through her hopes with small daily cuts. Sarcasm, comparison, neglect. They stopped being a team. They became opponents, and eventually just nothing. A sharp honk outside made her glance up. She checked her phone. Julian Kingsley, the man she had been quietly seeing for 2 months now, had promised to meet her after a meeting with his board. From there, they'd head to an art exhibition hosted by her dear friend, Delia Rain, a curator with the uncanny ability to make silence feel like poetry. Claire had trained herself not to get carried away. She had learned not to mistake kindness for permanence. But Julian had never made her guess. He never hid behind ego or grandiosity. For a man whose quiet philanthropy had changed entire communities, he was startlingly gentle, thoughtful, real. The bell above the door chimed. Claire looked up, expecting Julian, and her breath caught. It wasn't him. It was Liam. Dripping rain from his coat, umbrella in hand, still effortlessly composed. His gaze swept the cafe with that old, familiar entitlement, as though the world still owed him something. And then, his eyes found hers. In a split second, the room felt smaller, the air heavier, not because she missed him, but because of how far she had come, and how much he still didn't know. A familiar ache stirred in Claire's chest, the kind she hadn't felt in years, sharp and unwelcome. For a moment, she considered shielding herself behind her coffee cup, pretending not to notice. Too late. He had seen her. "Claire," said Liam, approaching her table with a cautious, almost performative surprise. "Wow, it's been a long time." He wore a sleek charcoal suit, the kind that whispered power and price tags most wouldn't dare ask about. His hair, once effortlessly tousled in a boyish way, was now sculpted into precision, another layer of the image he'd always chased. Without invitation, he pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, ignoring the lingering line of customers by the register. Classic Liam. Always assuming the room would adjust around him. "Yes, it has," Claire replied, her voice calm but firm. She placed her cup gently on the saucer to still the tremble in her fingers. Her heartbeat betrayed her quickening in that way it always did when ghosts took shape. For a second, she wondered what had become of him. But the memories surfaced too quickly. The arguments, the accusations, the slow disintegration of what they once believed was unbreakable. The fights about careers, compromises, whose dreams mattered more. She inhaled slowly. "Not today." "You look good," Liam said, leaning back as if they were old friends, and not once lovers split by 1,000 paper cuts. I heard you moved back into the city. How have you been? He offered a smile, but it faltered. They both knew they weren't those people anymore. I'm doing well, Claire said simply. Just taking life as it comes. And you? Busy as ever, he replied, fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the edge of the table. Just wrapped a meeting nearby. Then came the pause, that slight shift in his eyes. Claire braced herself for a backhanded comment, maybe an old jab he couldn't resist. Instead, he cleared his throat, reached for a napkin, and wiped a non-existent mark from the table. He was buying time. And maybe, just maybe, he was feeling something like guilt. I know things didn't end well, he murmured, but I hope you're okay. I am, Claire said softly. And maybe it wasn't entirely true, but saying it aloud felt like willing it into existence. The bell above the cafe door jingled again. A gust of wind carried the scent of rain inside. Claire turned instinctively, and her heart skipped. Julian Kingsley had arrived. He moved through the cafe with quiet confidence, a tailored navy blazer molding his frame, his eyes scanning the room until they found hers. And when they did, his whole expression shifted warmth, ease, familiarity. Claire, he said, approaching her table. His voice was soft, grounding. Sorry I'm late. The meeting ran over. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and bent down to press a kiss to her cheek. It wasn't grand, but it was real. And that small gesture steadied something inside her. Liam followed her gaze. His brow furrowed, confused at first, then something colder flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, calculation. And this is? Liam asked, masking curiosity behind polite detachment. Claire felt the moment crystallize awkwardness rising like fog, the kind that blurs everything you thought you'd prepared for. And yet here it was, standing right between her past and present. Liam, this is Julian Kingsley. My partner, she turned, voice steady now. Julian, this is Liam Prescott, my ex-husband. The tension coiled around them, silent but electric like the air right before a summer storm. But Julian didn't flinch. He offered his hand with quiet grace. Pleasure to meet you, Julian said with calm confidence, offering his hand. Liam accepted it, but his grip held a stiffness that didn't match his words. Likewise, he replied, polite but hollow. His gaze drifted over Julian, lingering too long on the tailored suit, the subtle watch, the quiet composure. He wasn't just greeting another man, he was assessing him. And something unspoken passed between them. Not quite hostility, not quite respect. Something more primal, a recognition, a challenge. Claire felt it like static in the air. Well, Liam said, abruptly pushing back his chair, I should get going. I have to pick up Sienna. The name struck a nerve Claire hadn't expected. Sienna. That name had floated in and out of Liam's conversations during their final year together. A colleague, he'd said, bright, sharp, one to watch. Claire had chalked it up to her insecurities until now. Maybe it had been nothing, or maybe it had been everything. Either way, it stung, but Claire knew how to hide pain. She had worn that expression, a carefully curated mask of indifference, for so long it slid on with ease. Nice seeing you again, Claire, Liam said. Then a nod to Julian. And good to meet you, Mr. Kingsley. I'm sure we'll cross paths again. Julian gave a measured, unreadable smile. Perhaps. Take care. And just like that, Liam vanished into the gray afternoon, leaving behind the faint trace of expensive cologne and an unease Claire couldn't quite name. Julian pulled out the chair and sat across from her, placing his hand gently over hers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a whisper that steadied the silence. Claire gave a half smile. "Yeah, just caught off guard." He didn't say anything grand or dramatic. No jealousy. No demands. Just a quiet squeeze of reassurance. "If he ever crosses a line, or if you just need space, I'm here." No questions asked. There was no bravado in his tone. Just presence. "No, it's all right," she said softly. "I'm over him. Or at least I thought I was." She let out a breath. Not a sigh of longing, but one that carried the weight of remembering what it was like to love someone who never really looked at you and saw you. "Let's just go," she said, rising. "Delia's expecting us." Julian stood with her, helping her into her coat, the way he always did, with quiet grace, not performance. As they stepped out into the rain-slicked street, Claire realized Liam had left more than a faint scent of the past. He'd left a storm behind, one she hadn't yet named. And what she didn't know was this: the encounter at the cafe wasn't the end of something. It was the start. The start of a slow unraveling, a collision of past regrets and fragile new hopes, and a truth buried so deep, when it surfaced, none of them would walk away untouched. 2 days later, Claire sat in the soft morning light of her apartment, curled in the corner near the window. In her lap lay an old photo album, one she hadn't touched since the divorce. She didn't know why she had opened it now. Maybe the cafe had unearthed something. Maybe nostalgia always found you when you least expected it. Each photo stung and soothed. Birthdays, vacations, smiles that had cracked long before she saw the fractures. Her phone buzzed. A message from Delia Rain. "Did you see the Chronicle? Liam's engagement party is making headlines. Apparently, it's going to be massive. It's all over the society page. Are you okay?" The message from Delia flashed on Claire's phone, followed by a cascade of wide-eyed emojis. Claire stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "I'm fine. Just surprised." "We ran into each other yesterday." Another reply came in instantly. "He's totally showing off. Word is, Sienna's from some blue blood dynasty. Apparently the engagement party next month is going to be ridiculous. If you need backup, I'll be your plusone in sequins." Claire let out a quiet sigh and leaned back into the couch. So that was it. Liam, ever the image chaser, had turned his new engagement into a public spectacle. Of course he had. He'd always craved applause more than intimacy. And yet, something stung. Not jealousy. Not quite. But an echo of what could have been. They used to talk about renewing their vows on their 10th anniversary, just family, close friends, maybe somewhere by the ocean. Something simple, honest, not for cameras, for each other. But that dream had dissolved quietly, and now he was building a new one, with someone else on a bigger stage. Claire turned another page in the album on her lap. There they were, her and Liam, in college, leaning against their dormitory steps. He had his arms around her, his smile wide, his hair a wild mess from the wind. She looked at them, their eyes so full of belief in forever, and she wondered how two people could drift so far from where they began. She gently set the photo aside. She wouldn't let herself spiral. Not today. That chapter was over. Now she had her own firm Alden design studio, a boutique architecture studio she'd nurtured from scratch. She had kept the name Alden because it was hers long before the marriage, long before Liam. It had meaning, It had roots. Her client list was small but growing, authentic. And then there was Julian. He had entered her life like something unhurried and necessary. She remembered the first time she saw him quietly gracious at a fundraising gala Delia had dragged her to. He wasn't trying to be noticed, but there was something magnetic about how still he was in a room full of noise. Introduced simply as a generous donor, Julian rarely mentioned money, but Claire had picked up the hints: an old family inheritance, significant shares in a tech firm, and a reputation for investing in causes, not headlines. They connected instantly, over architecture, over books, over the silence between words. When he'd first asked her out, Claire hesitated. Her heart was still guarded, her edges still healing. But Julian didn't rush. He gave her room. And slowly, without needing permission, trust had crept in. They weren't a fairy tale. They were better. They were real. Her phone pinged again, tugging her out of her reverie. This time, it was Julian. "Dinner tonight? Or I can swing by your studio, we'll grab a drink after." Claire smiled an actual, unguarded smile and typed back, "Dinner sounds perfect. I'm heading into the studio now. I'll be free by 6. See you then." She closed the photo album gently and returned it to its dusty box. She didn't toss it. She didn't burn it. She just put it away. A quiet gesture. A small reclaiming. A hope that, maybe, she could leave the weight of those memories tucked in the past where they belonged. She knew Liam's grand engagement gala would dominate the columns and conversations. Let it. She had her own life to build now. But as she stood to leave, a faint, unsettling feeling stirred in her chest. A quiet whisper of intuition. That Liam Prescott's chapter in her story wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. That evening, the soft chime of silver bells echoed above the door as Julian guided Claire into a warm-lit French bistro tucked away on a quiet corner of Cypress Hill. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, steady, familiar. The restaurant Le Miroir was the kind of place whispered about between insiders, known for its buttery cassoulet, vintage burgundy, and the soft jazz that wound its way around antique chandeliers like a lullaby. As they entered, the maitre d' immediately recognized Julian, greeting him with a deferential nod before leading them to a secluded table in the far corner. Away from glances, away from the world, Claire took in the setting, the glint of polished cutlery, the linen napkins folded like small sculptures, the candlelight casting golden shadows across the table. A few nearby diners tilted their heads, eyes flicking toward Julian with quiet curiosity. She was used to that now. Wherever they went, someone always seemed to wonder who he was, what he did, why he looked so accustomed to elegance. But Julian handled the attention with the same effortless grace he applied to everything else. He never flaunted, never explained. He simply was. "I went ahead and ordered your favorite red," Julian said, his smile calm and warm. "Thought we should celebrate." Claire raised a brow. "Celebrate what?" He tilted his head, feigning innocence. "Your news. The boutique hotel contract. Don't act like it's not a big deal." Her lips curled despite herself. It was a big deal. Just that morning, she had signed with a growing hospitality chain, one that had found her work through an Instagram feature and fallen in love with her aesthetic. It wasn't just a project. It was a turning point. "I still can't believe they picked me," she admitted. Julian reached across the table, gently wrapping his fingers around hers. "I can," he said quietly. "I've never had a single doubt." And the way he said it, the steadiness in his voice, the belief made her chest ache in the best way. She wasn't used to being seen like that. Not really. A server arrived, pouring deep crimson wine into crystal glasses. They toasted just the two of them with a gentle clink that rang like a promise. Outside, the rain drew soft trails down the windows, blurring the skyline and wrapping them in a hush only the heart could hear. Claire took a sip, the wine warming her throat, grounding her. They talked easily. Laughter tucked between bites of seared salmon and slow-roasted duck. Claire's eyes lit up as she described her design vision, organic textures, minimalist lighting, architecture that breathed instead of imposing. And Julian listened. Not just with polite nods or distracted agreement, but with real attention. He asked questions. He mirrored her excitement. It had been so long since someone had made space for her brilliance without competition. Midway through the meal, Julian set down his fork. He cleared his throat, his gaze dipping briefly before returning to hers. "I've been thinking." A pause. "Then about introducing you to a few people. Friends, colleagues, people who matter to me." Claire blinked. I want them to know who I'm with," he continued. "I want them to know you." There was a slight tremble in his voice, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Vulnerability, rare and raw. Like this moment meant more than he was used to admitting. And Claire, in that moment, understood. This wasn't about society or appearances. It was about intimacy, about letting her deeper into the world he so carefully kept guarded. And beneath the candlelight, in that quiet, rain-wrapped room, something shifted. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but with the gentle weight of something real. Claire paused, her fork hovering just above the delicate slice of pear tart. "You do?" she asked. Her voice, gentle but unsure, like stepping toward a door she hadn't expected to be opened. It wasn't just the invitation that made her heart stutter. It was what it meant. Up until now, her world and Julian's had moved beside one another, parallel, close, but separate. But this was different. An introduction to his inner circle wasn't a casual gesture. It was a threshold. Julian folded his napkin with care, then looked up with that steady gaze of his. "There's a charity benefit next Thursday," he said. "I'd like you there, with me, if you're comfortable." He didn't rush. He didn't explain. He just looked at her in that quiet way of his, as if he already saw her standing there beside him, belonging. Claire's mind spun. Would his world see her as someone who didn't fit? Would she begin to believe that, too? But instead of voicing the worry, she let her heart answer. "I'd love to," she said softly. "Thank you for asking." Julian's face warmed, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "I'm really glad you're in my life, Claire." She smiled, one of those rare, vulnerable smiles that comes not from joy alone, but from the ache of healing. They lingered over dessert, letting the night slow around them. Their conversation turned light favorite books, odd childhood memories, places they still longed to see. Claire talked about Florence and falling in love with the curves of Renaissance architecture. Julian shared a story about getting hopelessly lost in Tokyo and loving every second of it. By the time they finished, the bistro had emptied and the candles had burned low. "I'll drive you home," he said, offering his hand as they stood. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Claire remembered the first time he'd picked her up in one like it, how she had stubbornly called her own ride, insisting she wasn't that kind of woman. that she wasn't looking to be swept off her feet by someone with money. But now, she didn't feel swept. She felt steady. She still paid her own way when she could, and Julian never made her feel like she had to prove anything. He simply made space, in the car, his arm wrapped gently around her shoulders, and Claire leaned in, letting herself soften into the silence. The city lights shimmered across the windows, casting fleeting golden shadows across her face. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel like she was running from her past. She felt like she was drifting toward something new, something hers. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the high-ceilinged windows of Alden Design Studio. Claire sat at her drafting table, pencil in hand, sketching the lobby space for the boutique hotel project. Arched lines, soft curvatures, clean wood grains, and natural light imagined across walls still yet to exist. Her world, rendered in graphite and hope. The sharp ring of her office phone cut through her focus. "Alden Design," she answered, tucking her pencil behind her ear. "Claire, it's Delia." Her voice was breathless, electric. "You're not going to believe this." Claire sat up straighter. "What happened?" "I just got word from someone at the Chronicle. Liam and Sienna are throwing their engagement soiree next weekend." Claire froze. Delia kept talking, but the room had gone still. Just when she thought she was moving on, the past had knocked again. Uninvited. Unavoidable. And guess what else? Delia's voice buzzed through the phone, bright with disbelief. "They're inviting everyone. Old friends, past clients, even people who barely knew them." Claire felt her stomach twist. "Why would they invite me?" "That's the weird part," Delia replied. "Apparently, Liam didn't want you there. But Sienna insisted, told the Herald she believes in building a harmonious future." She paused, then added with a bite of sarcasm, "Or maybe she just wants to flex a little." Claire didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the window, watching the soft sway of the city trees. The words felt surreal, not unexpected, but surreal. Delia's voice softened. "I know you probably don't care anymore, but I figured I'd tell you, just in case that invitation actually shows up." "Thanks for the heads up," Claire said, exhaling slowly. "If it comes, I'll think long and hard before doing anything." "Just remember," Delia added, "you don't owe them anything." That brought the faintest smile to Claire's lips. "How's Julian, by the way?" Delia asked, her tone lightening. At the mention of his name, something warm rose in Claire's chest. "He's good. He asked me to join him next week at a benefit, introduce me to his world." "Ooh, big week for you," Delia teased. "Better you than me. But seriously, I'm so happy for you. And hey, if you decide to go to Liam's little circus and need a plusone or someone to tackle Sienna in heels, you know where to find me." Claire laughed, feeling a little lighter. They ended the call, and for a moment, she just sat there, phone still in her hand, the silence around her thick with memory. She could already picture it, Liam and Sienna's engagement soiree, dripping in silk and glass and curated grace. A parade of power, affluence, and staged perfection. Claire knew Sienna came from old Boston money. There were whispers of her courtroom brilliance, her icy charm. Liam had probably seen her as the perfect equation: affection plus ambition, romance folded neatly into advantage. That afternoon, a courier arrived at Claire's door with a pale envelope, cream-colored and rimmed in gold. It was heavy in her hands. Her pulse quickened. The return address was scripted in elegant, unmistakable calligraphy. Mr. Liam Whitaker and Ms. Sienna Marlowe. A chill spread through Claire's chest, even as she stood with a warm mug of tea. Inside, the invitation gleamed thick cardstock, embossed edges, and a flow of cursive that announced the upcoming celebration at the Roselle Ballroom, inside the historic Sterling Hotel. It was everything Liam used to roll his eyes at. Now, it shimmered with theatrical precision. Claire stared at it, unsure whether to throw it in the trash or bury it in a drawer she'd never open again. It felt too loud to ignore, too calculated to be kind. Part of her suspected this was Sienna's idea of generosity or control, a subtle message wrapped in civility. You're welcome to witness what you lost. That evening, curled up beneath a throw blanket, Claire couldn't stop glancing at the envelope resting on her coffee table. It gleamed under the lamplight like a dare. She would talk to Julian about it, of course, get his perspective. Maybe they'd just laugh and skip the whole thing. But even as she told herself it didn't matter, something small and sharp pulsed beneath the surface. A whisper, not of revenge, not of competition, but of strength. What if I showed up? Not for them, for me. To walk into that room not as the ghost of someone they discarded, but as a woman who had risen, who had healed, and who was no longer anyone's afterthought. Not bitter, but better. That's how Claire chose to see it. With a slow breath, she picked up her phone and tapped Julian's name. He answered on the second ring, his voice instantly soothing. "Claire," he said, with a warm ease, "I was just thinking about you." She gave a faint laugh, the kind that carries both nerves and irony. "Well, I just received something interesting." "Oh?" There was curiosity in his tone, not concern yet. Claire exhaled. An invitation. Liam's engagement soiree. Julian was quiet for a moment. "How are you feeling about it?" She curled deeper into the couch, hugging a throw pillow to her chest like armor she wasn't sure would hold. "I'm torn. A big part of me wants to pretend it never arrived, but another part—" She paused. "Maybe I want to see it. See them. Just once. Maybe it's about closure. Or maybe I just want to prove to myself that I'm okay." Her voice caught slightly cracked along the edges of memory. She hesitated, then added, "It wasn't even from Liam. Sienna sent it. Personally, it feels pointed, like a performance dressed up as grace." Julian's voice was steady, calm. "Whatever you decide, Claire, I'll be by your side. If you want to go, I'll be there with you. If you don't, we'll spend that night doing something better. Something real. Just us." His words folded around her like a blanket. Gentle, protective, solid. The knot in her chest didn't disappear, but it loosened. For the first time in days, she breathed a little easier. "I'll think about it," she whispered. "But for now, let's just focus on your event next week." What Claire didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that the coming days would draw invisible lines together. Liam, Sienna, Julian. Their worlds were about to collide in ways she never expected. And when they did, the aftermath would ripple through every corner of her life. The evening of the fundraiser arrived in a blur of nerves and moonlight. Claire stood before the full-length mirror in Julian's penthouse, the city skyline unfolding behind her like a constellation of promises. The bay shimmered below. Lights danced on the glass towers beyond. Her gown, deep green, soft as dusk, hugged her figure with quiet elegance. Delia had stopped by earlier to help style her hair into a graceful, undone chignon. Now, as Claire studied her reflection, she caught a glimpse of something she hadn't seen in a very long time. Poise. Maybe it wasn't confidence, not fully, but it was something close, something earned. Behind her, Julian adjusted his cufflinks, then stepped beside her, his eyes soft as they met hers in the mirror. "You look absolutely stunning," he murmured, placing a tender kiss at her temple. Claire smiled, nerves flickering beneath it. "Ready as I'll ever be." Julian offered her his arm. "There'll be a mix tonight," he said as they headed to the elevator. Donors, board members, a few artists, and the usual curated chaos of high society. He paused. "These things can be overwhelming. If it gets to be too much, just tell me. We leave the moment you want to." Outside, a sea of luxury vehicles curved into the grand entrance of the Laurelwood Hotel. Photographers lined the walkway. Guests in velvet gowns and sharp tuxedos floated toward the grand doors, glasses of champagne already in hand. Claire stayed close to Julian, her heels clicking against the marble floors as they entered the ballroom, an ocean of chandeliers, silk-draped tables, and whispered names. No sooner had they stepped inside than a radiant woman with auburn hair glided toward them. "Julian, my darling," she sang, arms outstretched. "Julian!" A rich, melodic voice cut through the soft hum of conversation as a woman with flowing auburn hair embraced him warmly, brushing kisses on both cheeks. "So lovely to see you again," she said, her eyes already scanning the woman by his side. "And this radiant creature must be—" Julian placed a light hand on Claire's back. "Claire Bennett," he said with unmistakable pride. "Claire, meet Monica Herrera. She's on the board of the Global Arts Initiative." Monica extended a graceful hand, her eyes gleaming with interest. "A pleasure, my dear. I've heard you're an architect. That's wonderful. We must talk. We're in early phases of planning a new cultural center in North Berkeley." Claire smiled and nodded politely, murmuring something gracious in return. Monica's enthusiasm was genuine, but overwhelming, like a wave that didn't wait to see if you were ready. More people joined their group, faces Claire vaguely recognized from business articles or gala recaps. The conversations followed a rhythm. She quickly came to know polite smiles, curious questions about her background, then a smooth pivot into million-dollar projects or global philanthropy. She played her part, charming but not boastful, but inside, a small part of her wilted under the polished brightness of it all. These people lived in a world where charity was currency, and handshakes could change market tides. Eventually, Claire drifted toward a quieter space near the gallery wall. Framed photographs and plaques showcased the foundation's work clinics in Kenya, school programs in Cambodia, wildlife conservation in Namibia. Each image was a quiet testament to hope, a reminder that not all power was wielded with vanity. She stood before a display about reforestation efforts in West Africa, letting the calmness of it steady her breath until a voice behind her broke the moment. "Claire Bennett, is that really you?" She turned, already bracing herself. David Langston, an old name from an older chapter. He had once been part of Liam's real estate circles, all sharp suits and sharper smirks. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, stepping closer, wine swirling in hand. "How have you been?" "Doing well, thank you," Claire replied, steady but distant. She kept her tone neutral, her expression unreadable. Old ghosts deserved only shadows, not attention. I'm one of the sponsors tonight, David said casually, with that performative air of someone here for the photos, not the cause. Always good optics to back global education, you know. She didn't answer. Then came the inevitable. I've got a table next to Liam's at the engagement gala. You going? The mention of Liam's name still landed with a thud in her chest. Predictable, but never painless. Haven't decided, she replied, voice clipped. David chuckled, a low, amused sound. You should. He's been showing off that fiancée like she's a ticket to Congress. Big DC ties, apparently. Might be worth a peek, see what you're missing. Something flared in her. Not hurt, not jealousy. Something colder. She looked him squarely in the eye. I'm not missing a thing, she said. Especially not that version of my life. Then, as if summoned, Julian appeared across the room, tall, composed, and scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers. Relief touched her shoulders like a familiar hand. She didn't need rescuing, but in that moment, she welcomed it. David, catching the shift, gave a lazy wink and a nod. Fair enough. Take care, Claire. And just like that, he vanished into the glittering sea of donors and champagne glasses. Claire leaned gently against the exhibit wall, exhaling slowly. She didn't know if it was the wine or the memories that left the bitter aftertaste. All she knew was that this world, the one she stood in now, felt real, solid, and whatever Liam's life looked like these days, she had no desire to step backward into it. A painting hung behind her, an abstract city splintered into jagged lines and broken reflections. Claire tried not to see herself in it, but the metaphor was too loud to ignore. Then a gentle hand touched her shoulder. She turned. Julian. The tight coil in her chest loosened as his calm presence washed over her like dawn breaking after a storm. Everything all right? He asked, his voice low, his concern visible in the crease between his brows. Claire nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, just someone from before. He didn't push. Instead, he quietly guided her toward the terrace, where the city sprawled below like a map of dreams and old memories. The cool air kissed her cheeks, grounding her. Claire, Julian said softly, stepping beside her. I know how it feels when ghosts from your past show up uninvited. It can rattle even the strongest person. She looked at him, the weight of her emotions threatening to breach the dam. It wasn't just running into David, she admitted. It's everything. Brandon's party is coming up. And somehow, that still stirs something in me. I don't want it to, but it does. He used to make me feel so small. Her voice faltered, but she didn't try to hide it. For once, the truth felt better than the facade. Julian reached out, brushing a strand of hair gently behind her ear. You're not that woman anymore, he said. But if going gives you peace or clarity, I'll be right there beside you. Claire exhaled, the fog inside her clearing just enough to let something bright flicker through. Thank you, she whispered, leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder. Above them, the city lights glowed like golden stars, but Claire felt something deeper rising like a shift in the air before a storm. This wasn't just about closure. Something was coming, and she had no idea how much it would change. The Four Seasons stood like a palace of glass and gold that evening, bathed in light and expectation. Claire stepped from the sleek car, Julian's hand steady in hers. She had decided, after much thought, to attend Brandon's engagement soiree, not for revenge, not to impress, but to finally shut the door on that part of her life. Julian wore a tailored black tuxedo, refined and understated. He looked effortlessly composed, but his quiet strength beside her gave her more confidence than she'd felt in years. Claire's gown, a deep indigo silk that kissed her curves with every step, shimmered beneath the flashes of paparazzi lights. Her hair, swept into a graceful twist, revealed the soft line of her neck and the strength in her eyes. The red carpet unfurled before them, lined with CEOs, political donors, and social darlings. Inside, the hotel glittered with floral arrangements the size of fountains, and classical strings echoed beneath the ballroom's high ceiling. They had barely entered when Brandon appeared. He stood near the grand staircase, his custom-fitted tux hugging his frame. His smile faltered when he spotted Claire. There was recognition, and something else. Surprise, maybe unease. At his side stood Vanessa Langford, luminous in silver. Her gown caught every glint of light, and her auburn hair was coiled into a classic chignon. There was something regal about her, polished and poised. "Claire," Vanessa said warmly, stepping forward with a practiced smile. "I'm so glad you came. Brandon told me he ran into you recently." Claire shook her hand, noting the diamond that glinted like ice on her ring finger. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied smoothly. Beside her, Julian remained composed, his presence like a quiet shield. Brandon cleared his throat, eyes darting between the two of them. If he had expected Claire to arrive alone, or unsure, he had clearly miscalculated. This was not the woman he once left behind, and the night was only beginning. "Julian," Brandon said stiffly, offering a nod. "Good to see you again," Julian replied, with composed civility. "Congratulations on your engagement." The air between them hung heavy for a moment, two men from very different worlds acknowledging one another with the thinnest thread of politeness. Then, with a practiced smile, Vanessa touched Brandon's arm and excused them both to greet another cluster of guests. Claire exhaled slowly. The storm in her chest hadn't passed, but it had quieted. "That wasn't so bad," she whispered to Julian, managing a faint smile. They melted into the flow of the ballroom, sampling delicate hors d'oeuvres and exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces from another life. In one corner, Claire spotted Amira, radiant in a gold dress, waving her over with a mischievous grin. Claire and Julian joined her, and Amira wasted no time. "Tell me you've seen that centerpiece," she quipped, motioning to an elaborate floral tower that nearly reached the ceiling. "It's like someone gave a florist a blank check and no restraint." Claire laughed, the tension briefly dissolving in Amira's dry humor. But even amid the chatter and laughter, something remained, an undercurrent of control, image, perfection. From across the room, Brandon and Vanessa played their roles to perfection. She was poised, luminous. He was visibly proud, floating from guest to guest, like a man who believed he had won something rare. Claire sipped her champagne, watching them with a detached curiosity. Then came the clink of a microphone, cutting through the din. Brandon stood at the front of the room, his smile as smooth as his tailored suit. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice echoing across crystal and polished wood. "Vanessa and I are incredibly grateful you're all here to celebrate this next chapter with us. We're honored by your presence tonight." Polite applause followed. Vanessa stepped in beside him, her expression immaculate. "Brandon and I couldn't be more excited for what lies ahead. We're surrounded tonight by the people who matter most to us. Thank you for your friendship, for your support, and for making this evening unforgettable." She spoke effortlessly, but Claire didn't miss the way Vanessa's fingers clenched the microphone ever so slightly. Her smile lingered just a fraction too long, polished but strained. More applause. The band picked up again, ushering the room back into motion. Waiters returned with fresh champagne. "You've handled this like royalty," Julian murmured near Claire's ear, his words soft and grounding. Claire turned to him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think I'm ready to leave," she said quietly. "That's all the closure I needed." He nodded, already reaching to take her hand. But before they could step away, a voice like cut glass sliced through the moment. "Leaving so soon, Claire? I don't believe you've even congratulated the bride properly." Claire turned. Patricia Langford Walsh, still elegant in her ivory silk and signature pearl necklace, but now wielding her words like weapons sheathed in civility. There had been a time before the divorce when Patricia had doted on Claire. That time had vanished without ceremony. "Mrs. Walsh," Claire said evenly, her chin lifting. "How lovely to see you." Patricia's eyes drifted to Julian, assessing him with cool calculation. And who might this be? Before Claire could reply, Julian stepped forward, extending a courteous hand. "Julian Kingsley," he said smoothly, "Claire's partner." The pause was microscopic but telling. "Ah," Patricia said, lips curved in something that barely passed for a smile. "Charming." Claire braced herself. She knew this game, the veiled remarks, the polite daggers. But this time, she wasn't playing defense. Not tonight. "Julian Kingsley," he said smoothly, offering a slight nod. "I'm here with Claire." Miranda Langford's eyes sharpened, narrowing ever so slightly as if trying to place him. Her gloved fingers twitched around her silver clutch, betraying the flicker of familiarity dawning behind her cool gaze. "You look familiar," she said, her tone laced with subtle scrutiny. "Have we met before?" Julian remained composed. Possibly. A charity event, perhaps. There was the faintest shift in his posture, relaxed, but alert, like someone used to attention they never asked for. That must be it," Miranda murmured. But her stare lingered. And then, with the precision of a blade cloaked in silk, she turned back to Claire. "I suppose it's good you've moved on, though some of us still wonder if you ever truly valued what Charles brought to your life." Julian said nothing, but Claire could feel the storm tightening beneath his stillness. His silence was intentional, an act of trust. Claire's voice, when it came, was calm, but edged with steel. "With all due respect, that's no longer your concern. I wish Charles and Vivian well." The tension in the air crackled like dry leaves. Miranda's lips thinned into a polite line. "Well, enjoy the evening." She pivoted with practiced grace and disappeared into the crowd, leaving a cold trail of judgment in her wake. Claire stood motionless for a beat, remembering how many years she'd spent chasing that woman's approval, wearing herself thin to be seen as enough. But that version of herself was gone. Julian stepped close, resting a hand gently on her back. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Claire nodded. "Let's get some air." They slipped out to the balcony, where the city unfurled in glowing threads beneath them. The hum of music and champagne chatter faded behind the closed doors. Claire exhaled, finally releasing the breath that had clung to her ribs since the moment she walked in. "That woman always made me feel like I wasn't enough," she said softly. The admission, raw and real. Julian's hand moved up to her shoulder, steady and grounding. You're more than enough, Claire, and I'm proud of how you stood your ground in there. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, tightening her throat. Before she could respond, a stir of noise erupted inside the ballroom. They turned, catching each other's gaze, a silent agreement, and stepped back in. The atmosphere had shifted. The earlier buzz of elite small talk had fractured into something jagged. Something was unraveling. At the front of the room, Charles stood once more at the mic, Vivienne beside him. But their glow had dimmed. Their practiced smiles were nowhere to be found, replaced by tense glances and stilted posture. "Please, everyone, remain calm," Charles said, his voice tight and stretched thin. A wave of uncertainty rippled through the room. Claire felt it like static on her skin. A large security guard moved purposefully through the crowd, making his way straight toward them. The tension in the room turned sharp, curious whispers beginning to rise like smoke. Her stomach clenched. "Excuse me," the guard said, stopping before Julian. "Mr. Kingsley." Julian's brow furrowed, his expression unreadable. Claire instinctively reached for his arm. "Could you come with me, please?" the guard asked, glancing quickly toward the stage and Charles. Claire's heartbeat surged. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The guard hesitated, visibly uneasy. "There's been a situation. It would be best if we spoke privately." Claire's mind raced. Something was unraveling fast, and somehow Julian was at the center of it. "We received a report that someone may be attending tonight's event under false identity." The guard's voice was measured, yet unease threaded through each word. Eyes turned, conversations halted, and then, like dry grass catching flame, whispers spread. Phones lifted. Flashes blinked. A scandal wasn't arriving. It was already here. Charles Whitmore stepped forward, taking the microphone with a little too much control in his tone. "Julian Kingsley," he said, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. "We'll need to confirm your credentials. We simply can't allow unverified guests into a private event." He said it with a calm exterior, but there was something else beneath the glint of vindication or fear disguised as authority. Claire's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around Julian's. "You invited us," she whispered, stunned. But it didn't matter. The accusation was already in the air, clinging to every whisper, every stare. From the other side of the room, Vivienne Green stepped forward, her voice carefully restrained. "Charles, this isn't necessary. Let's not turn this into a public scene." But her clenched jaw betrayed her nerves. The poise was slipping. Julian raised his hand slightly, a quiet signal of cooperation, of grace under fire. "It's all right," he said, calm as still water. Then, turning to the crowd, his voice projected with clarity and strength. "I'm happy to verify my background, but I'd like to know who decided I didn't belong here in the first place." A pause stretched out like a taut string. Charles blinked, uncertainty clouding his carefully composed face. But from nearby, someone else stood stone still. Miranda Whitmore. Her expression was smug, victorious. Claire's stomach turned. This had been planned, a punishment for stepping outside the frame they thought she belonged in. Then, from a quiet corner near the back of the room, another voice rang out, measured, unmistakable. "I made the call." Heads turned. Gerald Langford, Vivienne's father, emerged from the shadows. His designer suit impeccable, his presence commanding. He stepped forward like a general entering battle. "I've heard rumors," he said coolly, fixing Julian with an unwavering stare. That this man poses as a philanthropist, claims to possess wealth and influence, yet no one in our circle seems to know where it came from. We must be cautious about who we allow into the rooms where real power resides. And just like that, an invitation became an interrogation. Claire's blood simmered. Her voice itched to rise. He's not just anyone. But Julian gently pressed her hand, a quiet reassurance. He turned back to Gerald with a measured nod. You're right, Mr. Langford. I rarely speak publicly about my finances. Discretion has served me well, Julian replied, voice firm but civil. But I assure you, I am here in good faith. A pause thickened in the air. Guests fidgeted with their champagne flutes. Charles looked unsure. Vivian looked mortified. The security guard hovered, still awaiting orders. Julian, without hesitation, reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim black business card. The gold-embossed lettering gleamed under the chandeliers. If you call this number, he said, handing the card to the guard with unshaken calm. My legal team will verify everything you need, including my holdings, affiliations, and the endowments I've contributed to institutions across 3 continents. It wasn't said arrogantly. It was said like fact, like truth so solid it didn't need defending. The crowd held its collective breath. Claire looked up at Julian and saw no anger, only a quiet, indestructible dignity. This wasn't just a defense, it was a declaration. I'm a founding investor in Lyrian Tech, along with several other ventures, Julian said calmly, his voice steady as the sea. The effect was immediate. A wave of recognition surged through the ballroom. Lyrian Tech, one of the most influential names in sustainable AI development. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief quickly turning to stunned acknowledgement. Gerald Langford's face drained of color. He snatched the card from the security guard and scanned it, his jaw tightening as he read the credentials he had just questioned loudly and publicly. Charles Whitmore's expression twisted in real time, somewhere between disbelief and envy. As for Vivian, her eyes widened with the dawning realization that her father had just triggered a scandal neither of them could control. The guard, now pale himself, spoke quietly into his earpiece. Moments later, he nodded and took a respectful step back. It's verified, sir. Everything checks out. Our sincere apologies, Mr. Kingsley. Julian nodded once, dignified and calm. Then he turned back toward Charles and Vivian. Congratulations again on your engagement, he said, his tone cordial but unmistakably edged. But I think we'll take our leave now. Claire instinctively looped her arm through his. They exited with Amira close behind, still muttering under her breath about the ridiculousness of what had just unfolded. Only when they reached the lobby, away from the glittering chandeliers and tightening circles of speculation, did Claire let the weight of it crash down. They tried to publicly discredit you, she said, voice trembling as she blinked back the sting of anger, like you were an imposter. Julian's features softened, the calm in his eyes now tinted with quiet fire. I've dealt with people like them before, he said gently. Let's go home. But inside Claire, something had shifted. Brandon and Vivian hadn't just tried to humiliate her. They had tried to erase him, to reduce Julian to a footnote. And they had done it deliberately. Whatever game they were playing, it wasn't subtle anymore. The gloves were off. The next morning, the fallout began. Headlines blazed across society blogs and digital tabloids, elite gala turns, hostile mystery man or tech mogul. Identity drama at Langford Whitmore soiree, investor. Mistaken for crasher in lavish engagement. Meltdown, screenshots of the moment Julian calmly offered his business card went viral. Hashtags like Soireegate and the Kingsley mystery began trending. Claire's phone buzzed endlessly with messages from Amira, gleefully narrating the media storm. Even Charles had the audacity to leave her a voicemail the night before. Claire, hey, listen. I had no idea Gerald would do that. It got out of hand. Maybe we can talk? Just clear the air. Let me know. She didn't let him finish. She deleted the message, her expression unreadable, but her resolve clear. The voice she once clung to during restless nights now sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone she no longer knew or ever needed. If there was one upside to the night's chaos, it was this: Julian Kingsley was no longer the man the elite whispered about with curiosity. He had revealed his truth, not with aggression, but with absolute composure. And that composure said more about who he was than any headline could capture. Later that morning, Claire received a message from Julian. Breakfast at my place? I'm making the omelets myself. She smiled, the heaviness of the night lifting ever so slightly. He was calm, he was certain. And through the storm, he had stood not just beside her, but for her. And now she would do the same. Over warm croissants and rich coffee in Julian's penthouse overlooking the misty bay, Claire and Julian recounted the previous evening's chaos. His tone held a note of wry amusement, but beneath the surface, she sensed something deeper. Well, Julian said with a half-smile, buttering a slice of brioche, it appears the Langfords now think I'm some charming fraud who managed to con his way into polite society. He gave a quiet chuckle, but Claire could hear the undercurrent of weariness in his voice, a heaviness that came not from surprise, but from the familiarity of being underestimated. It's infuriating, Claire murmured, her fingers tightening slightly around her mug. You've given so much, built so much. Why do people assume wealth has to come with a mask? Her voice was edged now protective, not just of him, but of the goodness she knew lived quietly at his core. Julian offered a small shrug, gazing out at the skyline beyond the windows. People project what they fear or envy. Money doesn't just open doors. Sometimes it paints targets. He reached across the table, brushing his thumb gently across her knuckles, an anchor in the drift. That's why I've always kept a low profile, but now that you're in this with me, I worry about the noise. Claire interlaced her fingers with his, steady and sure. I'm not afraid of the noise, Julian. I'm proud of who you are, and I won't let anyone make me doubt that. The softness in his eyes turned luminous, touched by something that words hadn't yet dared to say. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, the gesture tender, lingering an unspoken vow wrapped in silence. Just then, his phone buzzed across the polished oak of the table. He glanced at the screen, his brow knitting. Is something wrong? Claire asked, her voice dipping into concern. Julian sighed. A deal with one of our partners is unraveling some last-minute complications with an acquisition in the Bay Area. I may need to fly to San Francisco tomorrow. Claire set her mug down slowly. For how long? A few days. Maybe a week, he replied. I hate the timing, especially after all that. She offered him a gentle, steady smile. It's all right. Go take care of what needs to be done. I'll be fine here. They spent the rest of the day walking through the sculpture gardens at Fairmount Park and browsing an indie art exhibit in an old converted chapel. It was the kind of day that held space for both healing and escape, a brief pocket of peace in the eye of a gathering storm. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Claire felt something coil inside her chest, a familiar sense of caution. She knew Charles too well. He hated feeling overshadowed. He resented losing control. And now that Julian's name and influence had been publicly confirmed, Claire knew Charles wouldn't take it lying down. Where envy lived, manipulation often followed, and her instincts, sharpened from years of enduring his power plays, whispered that more was coming. Her intuition proved right. Just as she arrived home that afternoon, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number lit up her screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Claire?" The voice was quiet but strained, feminine, familiar. "This is Vivienne. I was wondering if we could meet. I need to talk to you about Charles." Claire's pulse stumbled. Vivienne? Of all people. Her heart braced. This wasn't just a phone call. It was the beginning of another unraveling. For a moment after Vivienne hung up, Claire sat motionless in her apartment, her phone still in her hand, eyes unfocused. There had been no malice in the woman's voice, no hint of gloating for how Claire and Julian had been humiliated the night before, no trace of the polished confidence she'd worn at the engagement soiree. Instead, Vivienne had sounded hollow, brittle, like someone holding a crystal vase that had already begun to crack. The following day, under a sky draped in cold gray, Claire stepped into the Marigold Room, a quiet tea shop tucked between an indie bookstore and a florist in West Crest Village. The scent of bergamot and lavender lingered in the air. The soft lighting and hushed conversations offered a cocoon of privacy, the kind where confessions felt safer. Claire chose a booth near the window, her palms pressed flat on the wooden table. She didn't know what she was walking into, only that something unspoken had shifted the night of the party. And she needed to know what. Vivienne arrived a few minutes later, dressed in a cream blouse beneath a charcoal trench. Her movements were tight, cautious, like someone used to walking through rooms lined with glass. When she pulled off her coat, Claire noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly. "Thanks for meeting me," Vivienne said, sliding into the seat across from her. Claire offered a small, steady nod. "Of course. What's going on?" They placed their tea orders, chamomile for Vivienne, Earl Grey for Claire. Once the server disappeared, silence lingered, taut and waiting. Vivienne stared at the grain of the table for a long moment before speaking. "This might sound strange," she began, voice low, "but I don't really have anyone I can talk to about Charles." Claire's heart pinched at the familiarity of that sentence. "I've been trying to piece things together," Vivienne continued. "He doesn't talk about you much, but I've read between the lines. I know your marriage didn't end well." Claire's stomach tightened, but she stayed calm. "What exactly do you want to know?" Vivienne's hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles white. "Is he always like this?" Her voice cracked slightly. "So controlled or controlling?" Claire felt the breath catch in her throat, the ache of being gaslit, the quiet battles, the slow erosion. It all lived just beneath her skin. Vivienne pressed on, eyes still downcast. Last night, when he realized Julian had a past he hadn't predicted, hadn't vetted, he unraveled. Not because of what your boyfriend's presence meant for the party, but because he felt like someone else had taken the spotlight. Claire recognized the tremor in Vivienne's voice, the sting of living next to someone who needs the world to orbit them and punishes anything that threatens their son. She leaned forward, her tone soft but resolute. When Charles and I were in college, he was ambitious, but there was heart in it. But somewhere along the line, ambition became obsession. Everything turned into a scoreboard. And if I didn't help him win, I was the thing holding him back. Vivian looked up then, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not now. I used to think I was helping him build something, Claire continued. But I was just building walls around myself. And every time I asked for something, he made me feel like I was asking for too much. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. He says he loves me, but last night, after we got home, he said he wouldn't let some nameless outsider make him look small in front of his guests. Claire flinched inwardly. The possessiveness, the arrogance, it was all too familiar. Vivian shook her head. I told him Julian wasn't a nobody, and he lost it. Threw a glass, screamed, said I didn't understand what this engagement meant. Not to us, but to him. The words hung in the air like the echo of a slammed door. Vivian looked down again. I have wealth, connections. But that's not enough for him. He wants more. Always more. Claire took a long breath, her voice quiet but unwavering. I stayed too long because I kept hoping he'd remember how to love me without keeping score. She reached for her tea, her hand steady now. I don't know what you're looking for, Vivian, but if it's clarity, I think you already have it. Vivian didn't respond right away, but her silence spoke volumes. He wants to use me as his ladder. Vivian's voice broke slightly as the words escaped her lips as though she'd only just allowed herself to believe them. Claire watched her with quiet empathy, her own memories stirring beneath the surface. She knew all too well what it felt like to be swept into Charles's grand ambitions. How convincing he could be when he painted the future in golden strokes. At first, it felt like you were building something monumental together. Until one day, you realized the scaffolding was made of your own bones. Claire leaned in, her voice soft but steady. Why me? Why reach out? Vivian hesitated. Her eyes darted around the tea shop as if expecting shadows to lean in and listen. Even in the calming scent of steeped chamomile and the hush of quiet conversation, she looked like someone constantly bracing for impact. Because, Vivian whispered, I don't think I can go through with this wedding. And I need to know. Has Charles ever done anything shady? Financially, personally, anything. Claire blinked, absorbing the weight behind the words. My father's pushing for the marriage, Vivian continued. But something feels wrong, and I'm scared. The honesty in her voice cut through Claire like a chill. Fear has a particular tone, and this was unmistakable. Claire's mind drifted to the countless arguments over money during her own marriage, Charles insisting she liquidate part of her inheritance to fund some reckless business pitch. When she refused, he'd called her disloyal, selfish. That had been the beginning of the unraveling. Illegal? Vivian asked quietly. Claire shook her head slightly. Not that I ever discovered. But unethical? She gave a short, humorless laugh. He knows how to twist situations to his benefit, sometimes so subtly, you don't realize it until you've lost something important. Vivian's expression shifted, part relief, part dread. The kind of dread that comes when a fear is finally confirmed. She stirred her tea slowly, gaze fixed on the swirling amber liquid. He's pressuring me to sign a prenup, one that heavily favors him. There's language tying it to future profits from my father's investments. Her voice quivered. And he wants me to sign before we even have a wedding date. Claire sat up straighter, alarm flashing in her eyes. That's a major red flag. I know, Vivian murmured, her composure fracturing further. My dad thinks it's just strategic. But after what happened at the engagement party, the way Charles talked about Julian, like the whole thing was some sort of competition he lost, she looked away, as though the confession itself shamed her. I don't think I even know the man I'm about to marry. Sympathy rose like a tide in Claire's chest. As much as she wanted to wash her hands of everything related to Charles, she couldn't ignore the woman sitting in front of her, cracking under the same pressure Claire had once buckled beneath. You're not wrong to question this, Claire said gently. You don't owe anyone a wedding, especially not someone who's already making you feel unsure and small. Vivienne glanced up, her voice barely audible. Thank you for not judging me. Claire offered a small, sad smile. I've been where you are, and if you ever need someone to talk to, or even just somewhere to go, you can call me. I mean it. I'm not on his side. They drank in silence for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that isn't awkward, just heavy. Then Vivian spoke again. I'm going to talk to him about pushing the wedding back, at least until I can breathe again. Claire's chest tightened. She remembered how quickly Charles's charm turned to rage when control slipped through his fingers. Be careful, she said quietly, but firmly. Charles doesn't respond well to being challenged. Keep your people close. Make sure you're not isolated. Vivian nodded, her eyes shimmering. I will. Then she hesitated, fingers tightening around her teacup. Claire, about what happened at the party. I owe your boyfriend an apology, Vivian murmured as they stepped out of the tea shop into the gray drizzle. My father, he misjudged him, harshly. And I just wanted you to know, not everyone in my world agrees with the way he acts. Claire gave her a quiet, thoughtful nod. Apology accepted, she said gently. Vivienne wrapped her coat tighter around herself and disappeared down the street, swallowed by the chill and the city's hum. Claire watched her go, her heart wrapped in conflicting emotions, sympathy, disgust, and a dawning realization. She had escaped that life, but someone else was still entangled in its thorns. And deep down, Claire knew that conversation hadn't been a resolution. It was a trigger. And what came next could be far more dangerous, because she remembered too well when Charles felt backed into a corner, he didn't retreat. He retaliated. The next morning, Claire awoke to a stream of buzzing texts lighting up her screen. Half dazed, she blinked at her phone, then turned on the television. A red banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen in bold urgency. Breaking prominent financier, Charles Whitmore, under federal investigation for securities fraud. Claire sat up, the sheets pooling around her as the reporter's voice filled the room. Sources close to the case allege that Mr. Whitmore manipulated records during a high-value merger, allegedly leveraging private connections for personal financial gain. This comes just days after his high-profile engagement event at the Laurelwood Hotel. She stared at the screen. A blur of headlines. Footage of Charles stepping out of a luxury car. Paparazzi shouting. His face pale, taut, unmistakably panicked, flashed across every newsfeed. Her heart thudded in disbelief, vindication, and strangely, sadness for a man she once believed in. Her phone rang again. Amira's voice came breathless through the line. "It's everywhere, Claire. He's radioactive. Investors are bailing." Gerald Preston pulled all his backing. And guess what? Claire closed her eyes, bracing. Vivienne turned over documents. Amira whispered, stunned. She's the one who exposed him. Claire's breath caught. For a moment, all she could do was stare into space. Vivienne had flipped. The woman who once stood beside Charles now held the match that lit his downfall. Before she could respond, another call buzzed an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Claire. The voice was unmistakable, shaky, raw, cracking down the center. Charles. "I don't know what else to do," he said, breath hitching. "They've frozen everything. My accounts, my assets. Vivienne's gone." She left. His words were scattered, collapsing on themselves like a house of cards. Somewhere in the background she could hear rustling papers, frantic footsteps, the dull echo of chaos. "I've got nothing left. I need your help." Claire closed her eyes. She remembered this voice, not the arrogance, but the desperation beneath it. The panic of a man watching his empire crumble. She steadied her breath. "Charles, I'm not your wife anymore, and your consequences aren't mine." Silence crackled, then a bitter, jagged laugh. "You all think you're better than me now. Those people in their glass towers, they pretend to care, but all they want is to win. I played the game." His tone twisted. "Even you. Abandoning me after everything." And then came the venom, sharp and personal. "You think Julian and his perfect billionaire world will always be there for you? You think he'll protect you from this forever?" Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. His voice had changed colder now, spiteful. "You're not invincible, Claire, and neither is he." It didn't sting anymore, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer owned her. Claire gripped her phone tightly, her voice level and unwavering. "My life is no longer tied to yours, Charles. Don't ever call me again." She ended the call. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer release. The line went dead, and in the silence that followed, something lifted. It wasn't hollow. It was peaceful. In that quiet moment, Claire understood she wasn't holding on to the past anymore. Charles's fall wasn't hers to mourn. His ruin was no longer her burden. What remained was clarity and closure. 2 days later, Julian returned from San Francisco. The elevator chimed as it opened into his penthouse, and when Claire saw him step into the room, her composure gave way. She dropped her bag and rushed into his arms. "I missed you," he whispered against her hair, holding her as if anchoring them both. She pulled him gently toward the couch. "Julian," she said, her voice low, "so much happened while you were gone." She told him everything: the investigations, Vivian calling off the wedding, Charles begging her for help, his voice, his desperation, the accusation in his final words. Julian listened in silence, his jaw tightening slightly at the mention of Charles's call. "He asked for money, said he needed a lawyer," Claire continued. "I told him no. I felt cruel, but I can't be dragged back into his storm." Julian reached for her hand, grounding her with that quiet strength she'd come to cherish. "You weren't cruel. You were wise." "I'm proud of you for standing your ground," he said gently. "And if anything ever feels unsafe, if he pushes again, I'll protect you, no matter what." They spent hours reconnecting, trading stories, unpacking the chaos that had erupted in their absence. The media had run wild, framing Julian as the man who held his dignity while another crumbled. Claire hated the spotlight, but Julian reassured her with calm certainty. Scandals fade. Truth doesn't. That evening, they attended a charity art auction benefiting emerging local artists. The gallery, sleek and minimalist, glowed with soft lights and whispered elegance. Cameras flashed as they stepped inside. Julian, now widely known for his philanthropy, was greeted with admiring glances and quiet reverence. Claire instinctively tensed under the attention, but Julian leaned toward her with a calming smile. "We're here for the art," he said lightly. "Let the cameras fade." She smiled, reassured, and wandered between the canvases until one piece stopped her in her tracks, a painting alive with texture and vivid color, chaotic yet full of light. Hopeful. Julian noticed the way she lingered. Without saying a word, he quietly outbid every other buyer that night. Later, he presented the painting to her at their private celebration, a small evening gathering with close friends at his penthouse, toasting not only her new hotel design contract, but to the bold, vibrant future she was building. Amira arrived first, embracing Claire with effusive energy and the latest buzz from the Charles scandal front. Contracts canceled. PR firm dropped him. "Investors are furious," she said with a sip of champagne. "Honestly, it's like watching a skyscraper fall in slow motion." Claire said nothing at first, simply listening. A part of her, the old part, still felt the sting of pity. But the woman she had become knew better. She had chosen her path, and this one didn't lead backward. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Claire and Julian sat together in the dim, quiet living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glimmering city skyline. The reflection of the newly acquired painting shimmered on the glass, as if the room itself had been marked by renewal. Claire leaned against Julian, her head resting on his shoulder. "I never thought I'd come this far," she whispered. "You didn't just come this far," Julian said softly, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "You rebuilt the road." And as the city pulsed quietly beneath them, Claire realized she was no longer haunted by what had been. She was finally fully free. The vibrant artwork across the room seemed to shimmer in the ambient light. Glass of red wine in hand, Claire stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of Julian's penthouse, watching the city below pulse with its usual rhythm. But inside, everything was still. No more shrinking. No more apologizing. No more questioning her own worth. That version of herself, the one who had once tiptoed around Charles's cutting remarks and impossible expectations, was long gone. Julian stepped beside her, his gaze quietly fixed on her. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" he murmured. Claire nodded, her voice soft. "A year ago, I was barely holding myself together, just trying to survive the fallout of everything." And now she paused, emotion tightening her throat. "Now, everything feels open. Like maybe I don't have to keep bracing for the next crash." Julian took her hand in his and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You've always had the strength," he said. "You just needed someone who saw it without trying to steal it." He smiled gently, then added, "I admire your independence, Claire. I always have. I'm not here to carry you, just to walk beside you wherever you want to go." His words settled in her chest, like warmth after a long winter. Together, they turned to the glass, watching New York's night unfold, a galaxy of windows flickering like stars in motion. Behind them, the hum of the city whispered on, indifferent to scandal heartbreak, or redemption. Claire leaned her head on Julian's shoulder. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who mistook silence for love, who accepted not now as not worthy, the one who traded her voice for peace that never came. But that woman wasn't here anymore. In her place stood someone who had learned to build not just buildings, but boundaries. Not just spaces, but self-worth. She had drawn up new blueprints for her life, and this time they were hers alone. Below them, the city surged with noise and urgency. But here, in this quiet room, Claire found something she once thought impossible: freedom. Not just from Charles, from needing to prove anything to anyone ever again. She hadn't just healed, she had risen, brick by brick, choice by choice. With a man by her side who didn't complete her, but honored what was already whole. There were no grand declarations, no cinematic finale, only stillness and strength. Thank you for walking beside Claire through this journey, a story of betrayal, courage, healing, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming oneself. She didn't just survive the collapse, she rebuilt. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not to prove a point, but to rediscover her own. Her strength wasn't loud, it was steady. Her victory wasn't public, it was personal. And maybe that's what healing truly is: not revenge, not spectacle, but the quiet decision to rise every day and keep choosing yourself. So if this story echoed something inside you, if you saw a reflection of your own heartbreak, your own rise, tap like, share this with someone who might need it. Subscribe for more stories that go deeper than the surface. Because here at Shining Stories, we believe in second chances, soul-deep strength, and stories that remind you you are never alone, and you matter more than you know.